Hey friends, this is an episode that's about a week and a half old, but I've retooled it a little bit and released it because I think it's really important. And it's based off of the new, changed and mutated CV virus and the jab that's going around kind of congruently. And it actually sparked me going down a memory lane, and I kind of started from the beginning and moved all the way up to where we're at with the CV. And I actually found some interesting questions and some interesting answers, so I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll talk to you guys soon, and now the video. Oh, here we go. Canada confirms first two cases of mutant COVID strain from UK. Fears grow that super infectious virus is already spreading through North America after doctors said travel restrictions were imposed. Too late. Guys, let me tell you about this new mutant virulent form of the CV. That's what viruses do. They change. In the normal course of things in nature, they become more contagious and less lethal. And why would they do that? Well, everything has to find a balance. So when we all have these particles inside of our bodies, and when our immune system is operating against them at its normal rate, then these things are never a problem. But if our immune system has never seen it or doesn't know to attack it, then that's when it starts to replicate too much, and then eventually it kills its own host, and that doesn't serve the virus' interest either. That's the natural way it goes. What we have with the CV is an accusation, an assumption based on an extremely thin amount of analysis that this mutation, which has caused it to be easier to spread, has not diminished its lethality with it. So they're not saying that it's more lethal. What they're saying is it's easier to contract, but it could possibly be just as lethal. The thing about this is, and I was actually reading some interesting white paper by this gentleman. Hold on a second, I'm going to pull him up. So I found this article on ResearchGate because I was actually looking at a different article in relation to the same thing. And I found this man asking a question of all the researchers on ResearchGate that they were unable to answer. And it was an intriguing question. And he wrote a paper and published it on ResearchGate so that he could say what he wanted to say for the record. And let's go over it. It was common knowledge that some strain of CV sooner or later was going to cause a pandemic. It was known since the SARS-CoV outbreak in 2003. In 2013 and 2015, the world was informed that a variant of SARS-CoV in bats was emerging as a threat for humans. Why was no action taken by our governments and the WHO? The corona crisis was not only conceivable and foreseeable, but the world could have been prepared. We could have had medication and we could have had a vaccine long ago. That is, when there had been visionary medical, political, global leadership. Unlike the other CVs, both SARS-CoV strain of 2003 and the SARS-CoV-2 strain do not contain the HE protein. Further, a short lysine-rich region of the N protein was reported to be unique to SARS-CoV and SARS-CoV-2. Both characteristics prove that we are dealing with a variant of the same virus from 2003. Allow that to sink in. The natural order of a virus is for it to become less lethal and easier to spread. This is exactly what we have with SARS-CoV-2. This man's assumption is a very tantalizing question. Is it the same strain? It's just mutated and it's become easier to spread but much less lethal. Because if that's true, and he says that this protein, the lack of HE protein and the fact that it does contain N protein were specific to SARS in 2003 and are also specific to SARS in 2019. They haven't isolated and purified this virus yet, so it is 100% possible this is true, and it lines up. What does that mean? For one thing, it means this. Because in 2005, you guys will remember that I went over this paper that chloroquine is a potent inhibitor of the SARS-CoV infection. And the results of this test were amazing. It had an obvious effect. Now, it wasn't done inside of people, it was done inside of a petri dish, but it was obvious that it was working. So there was a known treatment for this. And it is a treatment that when it came out, when it was released, many individuals in power and government forbade its use. That to this day in the state of Pennsylvania, doctors are forbade from prescribing this off label to save people's lives. So you have something, and the way the gentleman phrased it, he's like, our leadership, they're just inept. They had all this preparation. But what's so interesting about what he did is he laid out the timeline that they did. Of course they knew about this. Of course they could have done all of this. And they didn't, because they wanted to use it to their advantage. They knew that there was going to be another outbreak of the CV when the 2003 situation happened. Here in 2005, they knew a successful treatment that was not only a treatment, but it was also a prophylactic that would prevent you from getting sick. So now they have those two pieces of knowledge. And at the same time, published in Nature 2005, same year, they published that they knew the specific mechanism in which these SARS class CVs induced lung injury and eventually illness. And they knew that it was the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, or ACE2, that was the mechanism. And they knew about the spike protein. They knew about all of it, okay? And this guy's telling us this from a side of ineptitude, but that's not how we think here. We all see that there was intention behind what was unveiled around this entire thing. And what's so funny is that the entire time people were like, oh, well, they're not really sick because they probably have their own little jab that they've already invented for it. They didn't need a jab that they had invented for it. They already had this treatment. And when other people found out about it, they barred it from being used. Think about that. So in 2005, we have the original SARS infection, and they find that it's a CV, and they find that it already is just on the cusp of being transmitted to humans, but not quite there. In the meantime, they find a treatment for it, and they find out how it works. So the original SARS just kind of fades into the background, you guys, if you'll remember. We saw people in surgical masks and running around in Asiatic area, and we didn't pay much of attention to it. But gain of function research was banned in the United States. And when it was, the Wuhan lab was funded to do gain of function research on the SARS-CoV. And what did they do? They needed to make it gain function. So what did they do? Using the SARS-CoV reverse genetics system, we generated and characterized a chimeric virus expressing the spike of BAT-CV SHC014 in a mouse-adapted SARS-CoV backbone. The results indicate that group 2B viruses encoded the SHC14 spike in a wild-type backbone can effectively use multiple orthologs of the SARS receptor human angiotensin converting enzyme 2, replicate efficiently in primary human airway cells, and achieve in vitro titers equivalent to epidemic strains of SARS-CoV. Additionally, in vivo experiments demonstrate replication of the chimeric virus in mouse lungs with notable pathogenesis. Evaluation of available SARS-based immune therapeutic and prophylactic modalities revealed poor efficacy. Both monoclonal antibody and vaccine approaches failed to neutralize and protect infection with the CVs using the novel spike protein. On the basis of these findings, we synthetically re-derived an infectious full-length SCH14 recombinant virus and demonstrate robust viral replication both in vitro and in vivo. Our work suggests a potential risk of SARS-CoV reemergence from viruses currently circulating in bat populations. So they took the SARS virus and they added the spike protein that was needed to connect to the ACE2 receptor. And they found out, oh my gosh, if you do this, it can become a transmissible virus among humans. Now, I'm not saying that they did that and released it because that's just conspiracy talk. But what I am saying is that they first found, because notice here it says that it didn't respond to anticlonal antibody treatment and it didn't respond to vaccine treatment. But it didn't say anything about zinc and chloroquine, did it? No. So they find out all the information they find out in 2005. In 2015, after years of gain-of-function research being banned in the United States and being funded by the NIH in the Wuhan lab, a version of the SARS virus that they say came from bats and maybe sat in some other population was mutated to create a spike protein that had a higher affinity for angiotensin 2. ACE2, which makes it easier for the human population to take up. Well, isn't that an interesting timeline? Going off of what the medical community definitely knew. They definitely knew everything they needed to know about SARS. They definitely knew that chloroquine was a treatment for it. They definitely knew that CVs as a whole were circulating in all kinds of populations. Maybe even all populations. We don't know, but the point that the man is making in the original paper I showed you is that the original SARS and this one are essentially exactly the same except for this novel spike protein that the Wuhan lab, just 1 in a million, happened to predict down to the science. And he's saying, why didn't they do something about it? Why weren't we ahead of the ball on this if we knew about all of this back in 2005? And I would submit to you that I'm done saying that the reason why they didn't do things is because of incompetence. It's not incompetence. So now we find ourselves in 2020 that we're in a medical lockdown and the world is crazy, and it really is. What a Christmas. But the great savior of humanity, the jab, is making its way through all these different countries. And as it is, this mutated strain that spreads faster, but they don't have enough information to know if it's more lethal. I don't know how you have one but not the other, but that's the case, okay? I want to look at the fact that it follows the jab from two different perspectives. From the first perspective, it's a good fear-mongering tactic to get people to get it. Of course, that's the first one we're all thinking, but I'm taking you here to Statista so that I can read you a little bit something about genetic variations and the CV. The SARS-CoV that causes COVID-19 is a new strain that had not previously been identified in humans. The virus is primarily transmitted through respiratory droplets and close contact, but airborne transmission, particularly in poorly ventilated areas, cannot be ruled out. Here we go. Different variations of the virus are being detected as it spreads around the world, but slight alterations to its genetic material have not affected how it behaves. That could change with the introduction of a jab, however, which might force the virus to evolve. So this is an aspect of it that not many people have thought about. Two completely new jabs that have a completely new methodology on how they work. It's never been done before. We're all worried about how are the people who are injected with this going to react, but I hadn't thought up till now how the virus would react. We have no information, just like we have no long-term information on what it's going to do to the people. We have no long-term information on what it's going to do to the virus. And it says right here that the jab can force it to evolve. What if it does force it to evolve? What would that look like? It's an interesting thought. And you guys want to know the most insane part about this all? This entire house of cards, this new variant that is terrifying the world's population. It's all based off of this, in red, all caps, preliminary, not peer-reviewed article. Estimated transmissibility and severity of the novel SV2 variant of concern. This was published on December 1. We estimate that VOC 2020-12-01 is 56% more transmissible than pre-existing variants of the CV. We were unable to find clear evidence of the VOC 2020-12-1 results in greater or lesser severity of the disease than pre-existing variants. So that means it in fact could be lesser. So they're saying they don't know if it's more lethal or not, but what they're not saying is they don't know if it's less lethal or not. And if it is, then that fits right in with the natural evolution of a virus. The natural evolution of a virus is for it to become more transmissible and less lethal. And what they're saying here is they've done model on model on model on model, and I hope we've all learned not to trust these models by now. They're probably the exact same models that put us all into hysteria the first time. I heard an interesting quote about models once, that all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. But so they've used all these models, modeling, and they think that it's way more transmissible, but they have no idea whether it's lesser or greater in mortality and severity. I don't believe the models, period, anymore. They were horribly wrong. And yet here we go, having entire nations building their policy. England is in stage 4 lockdown based off of a preliminary, non-peer-reviewed paper that is built on modeling. And right here it says that it does not know whether it is greater or lesser severity. When the news says it's so much more transmissible, we don't know if it's more deadly. What they're leaving off of there is they don't know if it's more or less deadly. And furthermore, they're leaving off that if it is less deadly, that would fit in line with the natural evolution of a virus. It would actually be strange for it to become more deadly. So they're taking this news and they're trying to make it as scary as possible when the facts just don't align with it. Another junk paper that is being used to literally dictate government policy. We are living in a medical martial law, the entire world, and it's based off of this modeling. We are unable to find clear evidence that VOC 2020-12-01 results in greater or lesser severity of the disease than pre-existing variants. Nevertheless, the increase in transmissibility is likely to lead to a large increase in incidence, with CV, hospitalizations, and deaths projected to reach higher levels in 2021 than were observed in 2020, even if the regional tiered restrictions implemented before 19 December are maintained. Our estimates suggest that control measures of a similar stringency to the national lockdown implemented in England in November 2020 are unlikely to reduce the effective reproduction number R to less than 1, unless primary schools, secondary schools, and universities are also closed. We project that large resurgences of the virus are likely to occur following easing of control measures. It may be necessary to greatly accelerate the jab rollout to have an appreciable impact in suppressing the resulting disease burden. So here we go again. Ignore the past year that they've been telling you that the lockdowns were stopping everything. Ignore the past year where they told you that the mask was more effective than the jab. Now, nothing can stop this new mutant variant of the V except the jab. Well, isn't it shocking that it would come down to that? So what I'm looking at are medical papers that say the jab can cause this thing to mutate when it wouldn't have before, and that it has, and so the answer is more jabs and faster, and we don't even know the results of these types of jabs on the virus itself in the long term. We've all been so busy talking about what is it going to do to the people who take it that we haven't even thought about what's it going to cause the virus to do. Unbelievable. And I'm not going through this paper with you guys. I read the only part of it that matters, but I can show you these charts. It's the exact same modeling that sent us down the wrong path to begin with. And here we are again going off of these exact same models. It's very worrying to me that we learned from, I thought, the mistake of making governmental policy based off of these models when the original models for the first CV infection came out and were horribly wrong. But we haven't. They're using the same modeling again. The modeling goes into the media, and then it goes out to the people, and then the people begrudgingly accept whenever the government dictates come down. This is not all just coincidence. It's not. And if you guys have been paying attention at all, the crash of the monetary system is next. There are huge things happening right now. It is a great time of change. Where it's the adaptable who survive. So, be adaptable, guys. Anyways, like, share, sub the channel. I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.